We are here with the Washington Week backstory, where we take two of our best reporters in this case and have them take us behind the curtain where they report every single day. This time it's at the Supreme Court, and we are joined by our two Supreme Court all-stars, Joan Biskupic of Reuters and Pete Williams of NBC News. And we've obviously been through an interesting, fascinating term in which big cases, life and death cases, have been decided, but also in which we got much more insight into the court run by Chief Justice John Roberts. One of the things we remember, most people remember, is Chief Justice John Roberts' confirmation hearings, when he talked a lot about how he came across as kind of moderate. When people asked him about how he would decide cases, he said,
"I will decide every case based on the record, according to the rule of law, without fear or favor, to the best of my ability. And I will remember that it's my job to call balls and strikes and not to pitch or bat."
And he also said that he didn't believe that the court should be politicized, which, who can disagree with that? The idea of a political court seems wrong, right? Let's listen to that.
I think it is a very serious threat to the independence and integrity of the courts to politicize them. I think that is not a good development to regard the courts as simply an extension of the political process. That's not what they are.
How long has Justice Roberts been on the court?
10 years.
It's been a decade.
Right.
And has he lived up or down to expectations?
It's in the eye of the beholder. You remember back in those confirmation hearings, he did come across as so moderate and kind of right in the center there that Senator Patrick Leahy, the leading Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee, even voted for him. A few years later, Senator Leahy and others had problems with him on Citizens United, the 2010 ruling that lifted finance regulations on corporation spending in elections. And then there was the Shelby County voting rights decision, where he curtailed the 1965 Landmark Voting Rights Act. But just this term, Gwen, we saw another side of John Roberts, where he upheld the Affordable Care Act again, and then he, from the bench, for the first time, issued an oral dissent in the gay marriage case. So he's not just one thing, and you can't, I remember a colleague once said, the court doesn't sit still to have its picture taken. It actually does when a new justice comes, but generally it doesn't. So we always try to measure a justice or the court by a single term. So it's kind of good that we're looking back 10 years, and it's really an amalgam of things. I think we can still say he's conservative, but he's not, he's certainly more in the center than might have been predicted.
And that's exactly how he would describe himself. Not the center so much, but that he is not beholden to left or right.
He hates the idea that the court is divided by liberals and conservatives. He has said as much, that he doesn't think we should use those terms, the liberal justices or the conservative justices. This term is one of the most liberal decades. You had marriage, you have holding up the Affordable Care Act, sustaining a big part of the housing discrimination law. You had a ruling about limitations on judicial elections. States don't have to put the Confederate flag on their license plates. The Congress can't tell the president what to put on passports. So this was a very liberal term. But I think you're right. In the long term, John Roberts will be thought of as the guy who wrote Citizens United.
Which he didn't. He didn't actually write Citizens United.
Right, but that's what they hang it around his neck. Taking the heart out of the Voting Rights Act, generally pro-business, but I think he does care about not being driven by ideology. But I think one thing has to be said about the Roberts Court. The biggest change on the Roberts Court is not the departure of William Rehnquist and the arrival of John Roberts. It's the departure of Sandra Day O'Connor and the arrival of Samuel Alito, who is much, much, much more conservative than she was. So you're probably going to see the more conservative court if the issues of, say, abortion and affirmative action come back, and perhaps even gun control.
What difference does it make who the Chief Justice is or what effect he has on outcomes? Is it just symbolic, or does he really change minds?
Well, as a practical matter, he is the most senior member who can then assign opinions when he's in the majority. So he has the power of assignment, which is quite important there. He holds many different responsibilities, including presiding over the oral arguments, but his vote is equal to everybody else's. So he starts the discussion in their private conversations. When the Affordable Care Act, after it was argued and they had to decide which way to go, he would have been the first around the table saying, geez, we're going to have to uphold it again. And, you know, and that.
I can imagine it went just that way.
Yeah. I don't think
That's what Justice Scalia says anyway.
And, you know, so he has an influence of being the first and the responsibility of, you know, being in charge. But yet, when it comes down to it, it's the power to persuade the way the rest of the 8 have too.
We spend a lot of time, those of us who do this, wondering about personalities on the court. And we know that Justice Scalia is the firecracker, yet he is friends with Justice Ginsburg, who is now the most popular court justice ever among young women. We have Justice Sotomayor, who's the hugger, and it seems to be very warm and outgoing. And then in the middle of this, you know, I run into Justice Roberts at my Starbucks, and I think he seems like a pleasant enough fellow, or I see him at a Nationals baseball game. He seems very regular. But where does he fit in this personality game, or is there one?
Well, I think that, you know, I mentioned Justice O'Connor a moment ago. You talk to any of them and they'll say that when she was there, she was the sort of social director who got everybody together and socially held them together. There probably isn't a person who does that right now, but Elena Kagan certainly is making efforts. She goes hunting with Justice Scalia, for example. This New York-bred woman who goes out skeet shooting with Antonin Scalia and actually hunting in my home state of Wyoming once. You do hear, though, the justices say that they're kind of settling in with each other now. There was a great period of turmoil. You know, we had this long stretch of Joan and I covering the court when there were 11 years when there were no change. So that's extraordinary. Now we're more or less back into the sort of every 2 years change. But I think they are adjusting to each other socially. Don't you get that feeling?
Definitely. And he, just so you know, his basic personality is fairly straightforward, a little, you know, a touch uptight. You know, he's 60 years old. He's, you know, he got married late in life. He's raising 2 small children who are, you know, in high school. So he's, you know, he's got a lot of other responsibilities, and he has a fabulous sense of humor. But he doesn't usually show any signs of levity in the courtroom. He's definitely not the friendly, warm sort as he presides over the court. In fact, what he tries to do is make sure that other justices get a chance to speak.
I'm not sure any Chief Justice has ever been described as the friendly, warm sort. They've got to keep it going, right? They got to keep the trains
They
running.
do, but let me just tell you something about Chief Justice William Rehnquist, who a lot of viewers would not think of him as the warm sort, but he was interested in everything, and he would, if you told him you were from the south side of Chicago, he'd want to talk about the region. He'd want to talk about how you grew up. He was from Wisconsin, so he was always talking about Midwestern things. He was just interested in a lot. He'd like to talk and carry on conversations. Whereas this chief is a little bit more all business. He's much more protective of his reputation, too. Remember, Chief Justice Rehnquist was constantly being accused of, frankly, being racist because of his old poll-watching days. This chief does not like criticism. And in fact, one thing he said early in his tenure, in kind of an unguarded moment in a C-SPAN interview, is he said,
I think the most important thing for the public to understand is that we're not a political branch of government. They don't elect us. If they don't like what we're doing, it's more or less just too bad, other than impeachment, which has never happened, or conviction on impeachment has never happened with the court.
he also doesn't like to be labeled. He doesn't like his court to be labeled. So he's got a little bit more self-consciousness in this role.
One final question for both of you about this court, and it comes from the lips of Justice Antonin Scalia, who in one of his dissents this week was very critical, it seemed to us lay people, of his colleagues. He talked about how they're all from the East Coast, they're all elite educated, and of course, this is why they would disagree with him, even though last I checked he was had an elite education as well. Does that sort of thing settle well? It felt kind of personal.
Well, he's right. I mean, he's certainly right in his demographic analysis of the makeup of the Supreme Court. And I think what he was saying there is that who is this court to tell us, to tell the American people what should be right or wrong about same-sex marriage, what should be right or wrong about any of these big issues? What do we know? We're kind of ivory tower intellectuals. Now, that is a theme of Antonin Scalia that he has sounded for as long as he's been speaking publicly. He feels very strongly that the court oversteps its bounds often. You know, he's right about that. I guess the larger question you're asking is, when he sticks it to his colleagues, does it hurt? They always say no. They always get along. And of course, they say they brush it off. I think tempers do get a little raw toward the end of the term, and then they kind of heal up and go at it again for another year.
They don't always brush it off. Justice O'Connor didn't like it. Harry Blackmun didn't like it. But Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, it's just Nino. Sometimes I'd like to strangle him, but I love him.
Well, that's about the way you ought to leave it, and that's probably the way to leave this whole conversation. Our Washington Week backstory with Joan Biskupic, Pete Williams, thank you both very much.
Thank you.